Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, The Fallen Pages. Today's book is Sex and Rockets, The Occult World of Jack Parsons by John Carter. So this book is not really a biography of Jack Parsons' life. It pretends to be one. It walks in wearing the coat of a biography, carrying dates, documents, names, institutions, addresses, police reports, FBI files, letters, and much more. But beneath that coat, something stranger is breathing. The book is a ritual autopsy. It opens a body that was never one body at all. Jack Parsons was a scientist, an occultist, a lover, fool, genius, and finally, Ash. Robert Anton Wilson's introduction understands this immediately. Parsons is presented as a man split into roles: John for science, Jack for magic, John Whiteside. Carter's structure then follows that fracture of his life. Early childhood, Caltech, the company he was working in, the double life, South Orange Grove Avenue, Enochian magic, and much more. The first image is almost absurdly American. Private schools, chemistry sets, science fiction magazines, boys with fireworks in the backyard. And yet Carter makes that innocence unstable from the beginning. Parsons is born in 1914 into a world already disfigured by war, apocalypse, sexual repression, political violence, and technological acceleration. His father disappears from the emotional stage. The boy grows inside a house where authority is already broken, where the father is absence, where the mother is gravity. This matters because later Parsons does not merely rebel against society, he rebels against the father principle itself, against God the Father, against political masters, against moral police, against the respectable lie that obedience is virtue. Wilson quotes Parsons saying, "I seem to be living in a nation that simply does not know what freedom is." That sentence is the fuse of the entire book. Everything after it is just combustion. Parsons' first religion is not Thelma. It is science fiction. Jules Verne, pulp magazines, imagined moons, impossible machines. That is important. Before he joins the occult, he has already joined the imagination. He believes the impossible is not impossible, only poorly funded. This is where the book becomes almost Platonic. Plato's cave is usually imagined as a prison of shadows, but Parsons reverses it. For him, ordinary society is the cave, and the rocket is the violent ascent toward the real world. The stars are not for decoration, they are evidence that the human soul has been thinking too small. When Parsons and Ed Foreman begin experimenting with rockets, they are not playing, they are trying to tear a hole in the ceiling of the world. Then Caltech, the company he was working with, enters like a cold cathedral of equations. Frank Molina, Theodore von Karman, and Hsu Shen Sin. Ed Foreman and Parsons became the human mechanism behind that would eventually become JPL mythology. Carter shows the tests are as dangerous, physical, and burn times, fuels, failures, explosions, fumes, and damage. The group earns the nickname Suicide Squad. After dangerous experiments on campus, that title matters symbolically. They are not merely scientists. They are sacrificial technicians, men standing before fire and asking it to obey. Aristotle would have understood the problem better than the Romantics. Potentiality must become actuality through form, cause, discipline, and method. A rocket is not a wish. It is matter forced into obedience by calculation. Parsons' tragedy is that he understood this in chemistry, but not always in life. That is the great split in the book. It is in the laboratory, Parsons tests in the temple, he believes. In rocketry, he measures pressure and burn duration. In magic, he often trusts signs, visions, lovers, and dangerous men. Carter is sharp here. He does not make Parsons cartoon Satanist, and he does not make him a clean hero either. That would be lazy. Parsons is more interesting and more damning than that. He's brilliant enough to help open the space age and naive enough to be manipulated by L. Ron Hubbard. That is not a small contradiction, that is the whole man. The discovery of Aleister Crowley is written almost as conversion. Parsons finds Crowley's Nox on Pax in Robert Rapinski's library, and Rapinski says that it was like real water to a thirsty man. From there, Parsons enters the world of the Ordo Templi Orientis, Wilfred Smith, Regina Cahill, and the Gnostic Mass. The Ordo is presented as not as an random occult fog, but as a structure. Carter knows the absurdity of it, but he also knows that absurdity does not make something powerless. Human beings will die for symbols, they will bankrupt themselves for visions, they will destroy marriages for myth. Now here in this, Nietzsche concept enters not as a declaration, but as a pressure. Nietzsche announces the death of God and asks what kind of human being can survive after the old moral architecture collapses. Parsons takes that question literally. If God the Father is dead, then what replaces him? For Crowley and Parsons, the answer is will. Not polite preference, not consumer choice, will as destiny, appetite, command, star, path. But Nietzsche would have been suspicious of Parsons. He would have seen grandeur, yes, but also dependency. Parsons wants to be beyond good and evil, yet he keeps kneeling before new masters. Crowley, Babylon, magical science, erotic revelations, the next great inner command. His rebellion against authority keeps creating new authorities in theatrical masks. Now here Freud would walk into this book and not even remove his coat. He would immediately see the father wound, the mother fixation, the erotic charge around forbidden feminine figures, the repeated attempt to transform sexual life into cosmic meaning. Wilson directly frames the Babalon Working as an Oedipal confrontation, with Babylon as the fusion of mother and whore, the sacred and the forbidden. That reading is crude, but it is not useless. Freud is often at his strongest when people think that they have become too spiritual for biology. Parsons tries to turn desire into revelation. Freud would say yes, and desire is still desire. The altar is still a bed. The goddess is still a woman. The ritual is still the body trying to become scripture. And now Jung would give a deeper language into this. Parsons is not merely chasing women. He is chasing the anima, the inner feminine, the soul image that appears as muse, witch, goddess, destroyer, bride, and abyss. Marjorie Cameron becomes the central image of this psychic drama. Parsons describes her in elemental terms: red-haired, fiery, independent, masculine in force, and artistically charged. Carter shows how she arrives during the Babalon Working and is interpreted by Parsons as the elemental he has summoned. This is the dangerous Jungian point. The psyche does not simply contain symbols. Sometimes it begins to treat living people as symbols. And then cruelty enters dressed as destiny. Cameron is not only Cameron. She begins Sophia, Athena, Babylon, and the witch woman, the vessel, the sign. That is intoxicating. It is also a form of possession. Now here, Eric Newman's Great Mother belongs here like a black moon over the script. Babylon is not the gentle mother of nursery religion. She is the terrible feminine womb and grave, intoxication and judgment, sexuality and apocalypse. In Christian symbolism, she echoes Babylon the Great from Revelation, the Scarlet Woman, the city of seduction and ruin. In Jewish mystical imagination, she sits uneasily beside Shekhinah imagery, the exiled feminine presence. Through Parsons, Babylon is far more violent and erotic. In Islamic terms, the comparison becomes sharper if we avoid cheap equivalents. Islam does not sanctify sex magic, it treats sihr, magic, as spiritually dangerous. And the Quranic imagination is deeply suspicious of humans who try to seize unseen power without prophetic permission. Parsons' path resembles the old temptation, not merely to know the unseen, but to command it. That is where Iblis, the devil, stands in the background, not as a red carton devil, but as the intelligence that refuses limits. And this is why Al-Ghazali, the scholar, is useful here. Al-Ghazali understood the difference between illumination and delusion. He knew that the inner world can open, but he also knew that not every light is guidance. Some lights are fires. Parsons lacks Ghazali's discipline. He has intensity, but intensity is not truth. He has courage, but courage without discernment becomes self-harm with better vocabulary. Ibn Sina, also a scholar, would approach Parsons differently as a mind trying to ascend from matter to intellect, from the smoky workshop of the body to the higher forms of knowledge. But Parsons' ascent never fully purifies it himself. The rocket rises, the man remains combustible. On the other hand, Ibn Arabi is perhaps the most subtle comparison. For Ibn Arabi, the imaginal realm is not fake. It is a barzakh, the place between hell and heaven. When a person dies, the soul goes there, like a waiting period, like a purgatory, and an intermediate reality where meanings take form. Parsons also lives in an imaginal realm where Babylon, Pan, Antichrist, and the stars become real forces. But Ibn Arabi's imagination is disciplined by metaphysical unity. Parsons' imagination is often inflamed by personal desire. That difference is not academic. It is the difference between contemplation and obsession. One polishes the mirror, the other falls in love with the reflection and calls it God. The Babalon Working is the book's black sun. Everything bends toward it, and everything after it feels damaged by its gravity. Parsons, Hubbard, and Cameron form a triangle of sex, vision, ambition, and manipulation. Hubbard acts as a seer. Parsons believes a force wants incarnation. He writes to Crowley that he has undergone the most devastating experience of his life and says only in the irrational and unknown direction can we come to wisdom again. That line is beautiful. But it is also evidence. It reveals Parsons' fatal hunger. He no longer wants the rational road. He wants the forbidden road precisely because it is forbidden. Now, Carter does not let Hubbard escape the frame. Hubbard, before Scientology, appears here as a charming, useful, suspect, parasitic. The Allied Enterprises episode is almost a Machiavellian comedy. Except Parsons is the one being eaten. Parsons puts in serious money. Hubbard and Betty contribute far less than leave with the money and boats and excuses. Crowley, usually no innocent lamb himself, sees it with brutal clarity and warns that Parsons looks like an obvious victim of swindlers. This is where Machiavelli would close the book and say, a prince who cannot read men will lose his state, no matter how noble his vision is. Parsons can read propellants, he cannot read predators. That is the ugly lesson. Genius does not protect you from being a fool. In fact, genius sometimes makes the fool grander, more expensive, more operatic. And Parsons' weakness is not stupidity. It is mythic vanity. He wants his life to mean so much that ordinary betrayal becomes part of cosmic drama. But sometimes betrayal is just betrayal. Sometimes Ron is not a seer. Sometimes Ron is a con man with good timing. Now here, Dostoevsky would ask the moral question Carter leaves vibrating under the floorboards. What happens when a man believes freedom means refusing every limit? In The Brothers Karamazov, Ivan's rebellion against God is intellectually serious, but it opens a door to chaos. In Demons, ideas become infections. Parsons' world is full of brilliant ideas, but ideas are not harmless. They are recruit bodies. They demand sacrifices. They turn lonely people into instruments. Parsons is not evil in the flat sense. He is spiritually reckless. That is worse for drama because it is more human. The book's deepest symbol is not Babylon. It is fire. Fire in the rocket motor, fire in the ritual, fire in sexual energy, fire in war, fire in the imagination, fire as purification, fire as technology, fire as damnation. In Abrahamic religion, fire is never simple. Moses meets divine command through fire that does not consume. Hell is fire that consumes without ending. Iblis, the devil, is made of smokeless fire and becomes the emblem of proud refusal. Pentecost brings tongues of fire as spiritual speech. The Jewish altar burns offerings upward. Parsons stands in the middle of all these meanings and tries to engineer them. He wants fire to be both servant and angel, but fire has no ethics. Fire only reveals the ethics of the hand that uses it. The other symbol is ascent. Rockets rise. Mystics ascend, prophets ascend. Philosophers ascend from grave to the sun. Lovers ascend through Eros in Plato's Symposium. From body to beauty to form, Parsons wants all ascents at once. Technological, erotic, magical, political. That is why he is fascinating. Also why he is unstable. A sane life usually separates categories. Parsons melts them together so that it becomes one. Rocket science becomes a magical act. Sex becomes a metaphysical engine for him. Rebellion becomes holiness. The woman becomes goddess. The self becomes Antichrist. The house becomes temple. The lab becomes the altar. The sky becomes destination and witness. So what is sex and rockets finally about? It is about the cost of trying to become more than human without first becoming fully human. Socrates says the unexamined life is not worth living, but Parsons shows the opposite danger. The over-mythologicalized life may become impossible to live. He examines himself, renames himself, ritualizes himself, dramatizes himself, but he does not always correct himself. And that is the failure, self-knowledge, where the self-governance becomes theater. At the end, the moon crater remains, the rumors remain, JPL remains, Aerojet remains, Cameron's art remains, Crowley's shadows remains, Hubbard's later empire makes the earlier episode even more grotesque. Parsons' writings remain half prophecy, half fever. Carter's book leaves us with a man who helped humanity reach toward the stars while privately sinking into the underworld. That is why the story works. It is not science versus magic. That is too simple. It is science and magic as rival methods of escape. One asks the universe for permission through experiment. The other tries to force the door through will. And Jack Parsons, standing between them, is the American Icarus with a chemistry set. Not because he flew too near to the sun, but because he believed every flame was a summons. So Carter's most disturbing detail is that Parsons did not merely flirt with the language of rebellion. He crowned himself with it. After a 17-day magical working, he had Wilfred Smith christen him Balerion Ermulus Dajjal Antichrist. That was his name that he gave himself. And this is not a casual name. It is an apocalyptic costume stitched from three Abrahamic nightmares: Balerion, Belial, the lawless demonic figure of biblical and Jewish imagination. Ermulus, the Jewish anti-messianic destroyer, and Dajjal, the Islamic false messiah, the great deceiver of the end times. Carter says the working climaxed with Babylon appearing in a dream, and later Parsons' black pilgrimage vision took him to Chorazin, the cursed Galilean city, the later Christian legend associated with the birth of the Antichrist. So in Islamic language, Parsons is not just calling himself a rebel or a heretic. He is reaching for the name of the supreme deceiver before the final hour. That makes the symbolism darker. In Christianity, he becomes the Antichrist. In Judaism, he borrows Ermulus. But in Islam, Dajjal is not simply an enemy of religion. He is illusion weaponized, false miracle, spiritual fraud with theatrical power. And that is exactly the terrifying irony of Parsons, a rocket scientist devoted to real fire and real physics, also became a man seduced by signs, dreams, names, and cosmic self-mythology, until the line between prophet, magician, deceiver, and victim began to burn away. Now, Parsons' death should be written as a final explosion of all his contradictions. On June 17, 1952, a blast erupted in the lower level of the South Orange Grove Avenue, where he was working with explosives. Carter says the explosion was heard up to a mile away, blew off Parsons' right forearm, broke his limbs, tore open his jaw, and left him conscious long enough to be pulled from the wreckage before he died at Huntington Memorial Hospital. Officially, the cause was ruled accidental, tied to fulminate of mercury, a dangerously sensitive detonator. But Carter deliberately leaves the scene polluted with doubt. The blast seemed too large. The material in the trash seemed out of character for a trained explosives expert. Cameron later implied the explosion came from beneath the floorboards, and rumors formed around murder, suicide, accident, and occult experiment, a secret new explosive, and even revenge by Captain Kynite, a police explosives expert whose conviction had depended partly on Parsons' testimony. Reportedly preparing to go to Mexico for secretive explosives work, the mystery deepens. His last words are disputed between "I wasn't done" and "who will take care of me now?" And within hours, his mother Ruth killed herself after saying she could not live without him. So Carter leaves us with no clean ending, only crater. The rocket scientist who mastered controlled fire was finally consumed by uncontrolled fire, and the cultist who called himself Antichrist vanished in a death so symbolic it almost looks written, which is exactly why it refuses to settle into one ordinary explanation. So I guess this is it, guys. I hope you liked the video, and if you guys have any comments and any questions, please leave that in the comment section below, and I guess see you in the next video.